The 8-foot tall ghost. Hello, this is a story from my high school vacation. My grandfather's house is about a 2-hour drive from where I currently live. It's a typical rural farmhouse, but I really like the countryside atmosphere, so I started going there occasionally on my motorcycle since high school. However, the last time I went there was just before entering my senior year of high school, so it's been over a decade since I've been there. What you need to know is that it's not that I didn't go, it's that I couldn't go. During the spring break after my sophomore year of high school, on a day when I was completely free without any plans, the weather was so nice that I felt like riding on my motorcycle to my grandfather's house. Upon arriving to his house, I laid down on the wooden porch to feel the breeze, propping my head up with one arm, and just stared at the sky without a care in the world. A cool wind flowed pleasantly over my body, and the warm sunlight wrapped around me, keeping me from getting cold. Then all of a sudden, a strange sound reached my ears. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded like a human voice. And it was a sound somewhere between po and bo, hard to distinguish. Curious, I looked around and discovered a wide-brim, white woman's hat appearing over the fence. The hat moved sideways, and when it reached the end of the fence, a woman appeared. It turned out that her body had been hidden by the fence, and she was the one wearing the hat. She was wearing a white dress, the same color as the hat. However, the fence was over 7 or 8 feet tall. I wondered how tall she must be to be taller than the fence. As I mindlessly stared at her retreating figure, she eventually disappeared from my sight. And then the sound also stopped. At that time, I casually thought that she might be a tall woman wearing extremely thick-soled boots or heels, or perhaps a tall man in drag. Later that day, while talking with my grandmother and grandfather who had returned from the fields in the afternoon, I suddenly remembered and mentioned it. I saw an incredibly tall woman earlier. Could it have been a man in drag? But they seemed uninterested and responded simply with, "Oh, is that so? I mean, she was taller than the fence. She was wearing a hat and making this strange bop 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 sound while walking around." The moment I said that, my grandfather's expression changed completely. Feeling a bit perplexed by my grandfather's reaction, I finished describing the woman I saw. He then put on a serious face, deeply pondered for a moment, and went into the next room to make a phone call. I couldn't hear what he was discussing on the phone, but it was clear that my grandmother, who was sitting in front of me, was trembling. After finishing the call, my grandfather returned to the room and told me to stay the night, insisting that he couldn't send me home no matter what happened. I desperately wondered what I had done wrong, but no thoughts came to mind. After all, it wasn't me who went to see the woman. She appeared on her own accord. My grandfather hurriedly prepared to leave, saying that he was only going to pick someone up and then drove away. When I cautiously asked my grandmother what was going on, she told me not to worry and that I had been enchanted by the 8-foot tall ghost, and that my grandfather would somehow take care of it. My grandmother began to slowly tell me about the ghost while we waited for my grandfather to return. It is said that there is a 8-foot tall ghost in this area. The 8-foot tall ghost takes the form of a large woman and makes a strange laughing sound in a masculine voice. According to those who have seen her, she sometimes appears as a woman in a traditional dress, or sometimes as an old woman in a kimono, and sometimes as a middle-aged woman in work clothes. While her appearance varies, the commonalities are that she is female, abnormally tall, wears something on her head, and makes an unsettling laughing sound. There are rumors that she followed travelers here long ago, but that's not confirmed. She can't go to other areas because obstructions or totems have been set up in all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, of this region to seal her in. Like all those who have been cursed by the 8-foot-tall ghost before, it is said that if you are cursed by this ghost, you'll die within a few days. My grandfather returned with an old shaman. The shaman looked at me and immediately handed me an amulet, saying to keep it with me. Then he and my grandfather went upstairs to a room that had been empty and began doing something. From that point on, my grandmother stayed with me continuously, even following me to the bathroom and leaving the door open. At this point, I thought to myself, something really serious must have happened, and I became scared. After a while, I was called upstairs to the room where my grandfather and the shaman were. All the windows were covered with newspaper, and amulets were attached over them. In each corner of the room, plates were piled high with salt. Additionally, there was something like a wooden box and a small statue placed on top of it. There were also two bamboo
small
sticks,
pots that I
though
could
I'm
use
not
for
sure where they
bathroom
came
use.
from. The sun will set soon. Listen carefully. You must not leave this room until tomorrow morning. Neither your grandmother nor I will call for you, so if anyone calls you, do not listen. Come out at 7 a.m. tomorrow. I've already informed your parents, my grandfather said with a stern expression, and I had no choice but to nod. Remember what your grandfather just told you and adhere to it strictly. You must always keep the amulet with you, said the shaman who came with my grandfather. Then I was left alone in the room. They said I could watch TV, so I turned it on. Even though I was watching, there was nothing registering in my mind. I had no desire to eat the rice balls and snacks that my grandmother had prepared. I just crawled into the blanket and shivered. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because when I woke up, an infomercial was playing on the TV, and it was past 1 a.m., according to the clock. This was at a time when there were no cell phones. Feeling uneasy and waking up at such an odd hour, I was startled when I heard a tapping sound on the window. The sound wasn't like someone throwing a stone. It was more like a light tapping with a hand. I didn't know if it was the wind or if someone was tapping on the window, but I desperately wanted to believe it was just the wind. I tried to calm myself by taking a sip of water, but it didn't go down easily. I was so scared that I turned up the TV volume and focused all of my energy on watching it. Then, I heard my grandfather's voice from outside the door. "If you're too scared, you can stop." I almost opened the door without thinking, but then I remembered what my grandfather had told me and I quickly stopped myself. Another voice came. "Why are you doing this? If it's too hard, just come out." It was unmistakably my grandfather's voice, but at the same time, it wasn't. I don't know why, but I had a feeling this would happen. When I thought about who it could be, chills ran down my spine. I looked at the plate of salt in the corner of the room and noticed that the top layers had turned black. I was crouching, trembling, clutching the amulet when I heard the voice from earlier in the day, and suddenly the window started shaking like crazy. I couldn't think of anything else. The image of that thing from earlier in the day, reaching up from below the window with a smiling face and shaking the window, flashed through my mind, and I felt like I was going insane. I then decided to pray to the small statue on the wooden box with all my might. It was a really long and agonizing night, but morning eventually came, and I opened my eyes and the morning news was on the TV I had left on. The time displayed in the corner of the screen was 7:13. And there were no more tapping sounds or voices. I must have fainted at some point. The salt in the corner of the room had turned completely black. Just to be sure, I checked my own watch, and it showed the same time. Cautiously, I opened the door, and there were my grandfather and the shaman waiting for me. They were there crying, saying, "Thank goodness! Thank goodness!" When I went downstairs, my father was also there. When I heard my grandfather's voice from outside telling me to come out, I saw a minivan parked in the yard, and a few men who looked like villagers were standing there. The minivan had 9 seats. My grandfather was in the driver's seat, my father in the passenger seat, and the shaman was also sitting in a chair between them. I was made to sit in the very center, so 8 people surrounded me. Bow your head and never open your eyes. Even if we can't see it, you can. Keep your eyes closed until we say it's okay. A man who looked to be around 50 and who was sitting to my right spoke. The car started moving. After driving for a while, the shaman sitting in the passenger seat began chanting prayers, saying that this was a critical point. Suddenly, from outside the window, that sound came again. I was clutching the amulet the shaman had given me, my eyes closed and my head bowed. But just for one moment I accidentally opened my eyes and looked to the side. A woman in a white dress with long arms and legs, her joints bending in strange directions, was running right next to the car. Her head was higher than the window, so I couldn't see it, but as she seemed to be trying to bend down and look into the car, I involuntarily let out a gasp. "Don't look!" the man sitting next to me said angrily. Startled, I tightly closed my eyes and gripped the amulet even harder. All of a sudden, something started hitting the glass window. It seemed that the people sitting next to me couldn't see its form or hear its voice, but they could hear the banging sound. Some people were breathing heavily, and every time the window was tapped, someone even let out a scream. Despite all this, we somehow arrived outside the area where the village's protective totems were placed. We got out of the car to switch to another car that my father had prepared in advance. My grandfather was bowing his head in thanks to the man who had came with us, and when I tried to open my hand and was clutching the amulet, my fingers wouldn't straighten as they were stiff with terror. The crumpled amulet had turned black as if it had been burnt. The shaman and my grandfather said that once we were out of the village, the 8-foot-tall spirit would not be able to follow us, so we would be fine. The shaman gave me another amulet just in case, and my father and I returned to home via the road. I eventually settled back into normal life where nothing had changed and lived without any incidents for over a decade. My grandfather, grandmother, and the shaman have all passed away, and the reason I'm writing this now is, according to another story I heard, the day before yesterday an outsider was drunk driving and had an accident near the village. The car crashed and broke one of the protective totems. Since yesterday, a familiar sound has been coming from outside my window.